Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firm podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. We have multiple news stories today. The first one I wanted to talk about is news that PwC is selling their global mobility services practice, and they are selling it to CD&R, Clayton, Dubilier, and Rice. And Clayton, Dubilier, and Rice is a private equity company. And PwC's global mobility tax and immigration service business, it's a global leader in employee tax, immigration, business travel, mobility managed services, and payroll solutions to multinational organizations. And reportedly, it was sold for $2.2 billion. And the transaction will create a freestanding global platform with more than 5,700 professionals, hyper-focused on seamless cross-border experience for clients while accelerating investment in technology and new services. That's according to a PwC press release. And I think it's very interesting that PwC is choosing to sell this business right now. According to various news stories, it seemed like because of COVID, you have a lot of people are changing the way they work and people are transitioning around the world. And I can't think of a reason why PwC would be selling this right now, other than that they view it's like at the height of the market for this type of practice. Because if I was PwC, you have to question, like, what are you going to use this money for, the money you get from this transaction, unless you're trying to invest it in something else. For example, the new equation that they're trying to build, maybe there's something they're trying to build there, but the amount of money that they are going to get from this transaction, to me, would have to be more than what they see coming from this business in the future. And obviously, the private equity group that bought it thinks that they're going to be able to get more value out of it than PwC. But PwC and the Big Four accounting firms also tend to do these types of transactions, and then they rebuild those groups. So maybe that's something else that PwC said, PwC thinks they're going to do. And Bob Moritz had the following to say, who's the global chairman of PwC. He said, the sale will allow PwC to increase its investment in and prioritize building capabilities relevant to our global strategy, the new equation. And so that's very vague. Doesn't say what money's going to be used for, but I mean, maybe they saw a decline in revenues for this practice, or maybe they saw revenues that were steady state, not really growing. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what PwC does with this money, or why they chose. I think it's just the height of the market after COVID-19. They feel like maybe this is the best time to sell. That's the only thing that I could make sense of. But plus, if they sold it for $2.2 billion, that means they're probably only seeing, a couple $100 million out of this every year, or a little bit more than that. So I think it's just interesting. And I think PwC will build this up again after this sale, because to me, it seems a little bit confusing to sell this now, because PwC offers services to their largest clients, all kinds of services. And this is a service that their clients are going to want. And so now PwC is going to have to refer people to somebody else for this until they build up the practice, and they will no doubt build it up again, I feel like, after this transaction. The next news story I wanted to talk about was E&Y. E&Y had somebody go on CNBC. Well, there's actually two CNBC stories that I wanted to cover. The first one was somebody from E&Y going on CNBC and talking about Bitcoin and the volatility, because there's a new ETF offering, or futures offering, for Bitcoin. And that has seen the price of Bitcoin skyrocket as more institutions can now get involved in Bitcoin. And the person who went on CNBC said that, from E&Y, so like the person's from E&Y, and they were talking about how Bitcoin will, even though that more institutional money can now be involved, it's still going to be a volatile asset. And I think this is very important, and actually a very sustainable practice for E&Y and the other Big Four accounting firms is cryptocurrency, getting involved in the regulations, but also helping asset managers understand the regulations and just consulting in general, just consulting top to bottom, audit. I mean, obviously they can't do that right now, but tax consulting, everything from top to bottom. There's so much potential here, and this space is only growing, as can be seen by the skyrocketing price of Bitcoin and Ethereum. And to me, this is like a real reason to go on CNBC versus this next story, which I'm going to talk about, which is the CEO of EY, also was on CNBC. This episode is brought to you by Boomer. Boomer helps you ace the interview at the Big Four accounting firms, and it does this by helping you practice on questions typically asked on the Big Four interview. And if you use the link or promo code which goes to tryboomer.com/big4, or the promo code BIG4, then listeners get 10% off their purchase. So go ahead and check out their website, tryboomer.com, and see if you like all the tools they have that can help you prep for your Big Four interview, and you do choose to purchase it. Make sure to use the link in the show notes, because with that link, you're going to get 10% off, or make sure to use our promo code. All the details are in the show notes. EY is very connected to CNBC. You can tell they have a lot of contacts in CNBC. I think them and Deloitte are very well connected there, but EY goes on CNBC all the time. So that's another reason I'm covering these. And the CEO for EY went on there to talk about some institute he was at in California, and I'll play a clip of that.
Joining me now is EY Chairman and CEO Carmine DiCibio. Great to have you here. You know, a lot of the focus of this year's meeting is on ESG, diversity and inclusion. These are obviously areas that you know very well. So I'd love to just start there, Carmine, because you've spoken about, I just sat down with Mike Wirth talking about their initiatives at Chevron, but you've talked a lot about how we have to have robust metrics to actually measure all the stuff that everybody promises they're going to do, and be able to compare and really know. Are we anywhere near being able to do that yet?
The short answer, David, is not really. But here's what I would say on any metrics. First of all, in terms of ESG, you have to really build it into your strategy.
And so he went on there to discuss ESG and diversity, which is what we talk about on this podcast all the time, because that's what the Big Four accounting firms are pushing, because they see increased regulation, increased disclosure in this area and social justice world around the whole globe. He talked about in this interview about how they partnered with the World Economic Forum and the International Business Council. Like, they're pushing all of these regulations along with governments, along with other businesses, and they're pushing it to gain revenue for themselves. They try to make it seem like they care about these issues, but it's more of if you watch that CNBC interview with Carmine DiCibio, he's talked about how they came up with the standards in conjunction with all these entities, and they want people to adopt their standards. And they're worried that people won't adopt their standards, and there'll be different standards, and businesses won't be doing the right things because they came up with the standards, and that's the way it needs to go. And to me, E&Y, governments, other Big Four accounting firms, other groups of corporations are trying to create an industry here out of nothing, an ESG, DEI industry, and pushing revenues out of this, versus that other CNBC interview that E&Y did, where I feel like that's what they should be focusing on, cryptocurrencies and things like that. That's just my personal view, but I feel like there's tons of money flowing into that. Pushing this ESG and DEI is there's not real adoption, and that's what Carmine DiCibio was talking about in this interview, that nobody's really adopting it well yet, but they really need to buy into it. And so I just thought it was hilarious comparing these two interviews, where we know right now the Big Four accounting firms, what they're the most focused on, and we see it all the time in the news stories, is ESG and DEI. But what they should be focusing on are things that clients are asking for, like cryptocurrency consulting services, and I feel like they should push that more. But it's just interesting that E&Y is going on CNBC more, and I feel like another thing they could go on to these news stations more and talk about is the global supply chain, because that's an opportunity for them. Like, that's another area that everybody's talking about, that and inflation. But I feel like the big four accounting firms have a unique insight into supply chain issues, and there's multiple solutions they come up with to advise clients on, and that's what they should be pushing. They should push global supply chain consulting and cryptocurrency versus ESG and DEI, and forcing people to adopt that when that's not what clients really necessarily need right now. But those are the updates I wanted to provide for today. Make sure to subscribe to get future updates and check out the show notes for helpful links. Thanks for listening.